Good evening, I'm Alex Truth.
And I'm Maya Clarity. Welcome to Truth Report.
Tonight, we're investigating two stories that reveal a disturbing pattern: powerful interests manipulating systems designed to protect the public good. In Hong Kong, financial elites prioritize corporate profits over climate action. In the United Kingdom, a foreign secretary allegedly threatens the International Criminal Court to shield allies from war crimes prosecution.
These aren't isolated incidents. They're symptoms of a global order where accountability mechanisms are systematically undermined when they threaten the powerful. Let's dive in.
We'll start with what might seem like mundane tax policy but reveals how climate catastrophe takes a backseat to corporate interests.
Our first story takes us to Davos, Switzerland, where Hong Kong's financial secretary Paul Chan-Mopa stood before the World Economic Forum and declared that his city would not pursue carbon-based taxation as part of its decarbonization strategy. This announcement came during a panel discussion titled How to Finance Decarbonization? The irony is almost too perfect.
According to reporting from the South China Morning Post, Chan's reasoning was crystal clear: a simple and low-tax regime is Hong Kong's core competitiveness. He emphasized that Hong Kong lacks both value-added tax and goods and services tax, making tax simplicity central to the territory's economic advantage. In other words, maintaining Hong Kong's status as a tax haven for corporations and the ultra-wealthy matters more than addressing the existential threat of climate change.
Let's be absolutely clear about what's happening here. Hong Kong, like every other territory on Earth, faces devastating consequences from climate breakdown. Rising sea levels threaten to submerge coastal infrastructure. Extreme weather events are intensifying. Public health crises are mounting. But when presented with one of the most effective policy tools for reducing emissions, making polluters pay for the damage they cause, Chan's response is to protect corporate competitiveness.
The context makes this even more revealing. Konrad Kiger, CEO of Swiss chemicals producer Clariant, directly asked Chan whether Hong Kong would adopt a broader approach beyond electric vehicle tax incentives. Kiger suggested mandatory carbon disclosure for products and reduced taxes on low-carbon goods. These are modest, market-friendly mechanisms that even corporate executives recognize as necessary.
And Chan's response? Double down on subsidies for private companies while refusing any measure that might hold polluters accountable. He pointed to government funding for transport companies to test hydrogen fuel cell buses as an example of Hong Kong's approach. Public money flows to private corporations for experimental technology, while those same corporations face no penalties for continuing to emit greenhouse gases.
This is a textbook case of privatizing profits while socializing costs. The Hong Kong government spends public funds to help companies develop potentially profitable green technologies, but refuses to implement carbon pricing that would internalize the environmental costs of pollution. Corporations get the subsidy windfall. The public gets stuck with the climate bill.
Hong Kong's Climate Action Plan 2050 targets net zero electricity through coal phase-out and renewable expansion. It focuses on 4 areas: power generation, building electricity consumption, transport, and waste reduction. These are important goals. But here's the critical question: how do you achieve transformational change without any mechanism to discourage high-carbon activities?
You don't. That's the point. What Chan is describing isn't a pathway to decarbonization. It's greenwashing designed to create the appearance of climate action while preserving the fundamental economic structure that created the crisis. Voluntary corporate initiatives and selective subsidies have been the dominant approach for decades, and emissions keep rising.
Let's look at the broader context. Singapore, one of Hong Kong's primary competitors for financial services dominance in Asia, implemented a carbon tax in 2019. The tax started at $5 per ton of emissions and is being progressively increased. Singapore hasn't collapsed. Its low tax regime hasn't been destroyed. But it has created a price signal that drives emissions reduction.
Meanwhile, the European Union has implemented the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which will impose tariffs on high-carbon imports. California has cap-and-trade. Even China, where Hong Kong is supposedly part of one country, two systems, operates regional carbon markets and is expanding a national emissions trading scheme. Hong Kong is increasingly isolated in its refusal to adopt any form of carbon pricing.
And that isolation matters, because climate change doesn't respect borders or tax regimes. When Hong Kong refuses to price carbon, it becomes a haven for carbon-intensive industries seeking to avoid accountability. This isn't just failing to solve the problem, it's actively making it worse by creating regulatory arbitrage opportunities.
Chan stated at Davos that Hong Kong's key strategy involves collaborating with the private sector to develop robust business cases for sustainable investments. Translation: we're hoping corporations voluntarily choose to sacrifice profits for the planet. How's that working out? Hong Kong's greenhouse gas emissions have remained stubbornly high, with only modest reductions from 2014 baseline levels.
Here's who benefits from this approach: property developers who avoid costs from building efficiency standards. Shipping companies that escape fuel taxation. Financial institutions that continue channeling capital into fossil fuel projects without penalty. The same corporate interests that dominate Hong Kong's governance structure and have repeatedly blocked democratic reforms.
And who loses? The 7.5 million residents of Hong Kong who will face typhoons, flooding, heat waves, and public health crises as climate breakdown accelerates. Future generations who inherit a destabilized climate system. Workers in climate-vulnerable industries who won't receive transition support because there's no carbon tax revenue to fund retraining programs.
This connects to a broader pattern we're seeing globally, the systematic hollowing out of public institutions and policy tools that might constrain corporate power. Whether it's tax policy, environmental regulation, labor standards, or antitrust enforcement, the story is the same. Mechanisms of accountability are dismantled or deliberately left unimplemented.
Which brings us to our second story, where we see this pattern playing out in the realm of international law and war crimes accountability.
On January 16, 2026, the UK Foreign Office confirmed, via a Freedom of Information request, that a phone call took place between then Foreign Secretary David Cameron and International Criminal Court Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan on April 23, 2024. This confirmation comes from reporting by Middle East Eye, and it corroborates allegations that have been circulating for months about political interference in ICC investigations.
The timing is critical. This call occurred exactly 1 month before Khan sought arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant related to alleged war crimes in Gaza. Khan was on an official visit to Venezuela when Cameron called him, alone, with no other officials present.
According to the allegations, which have been detailed by multiple sources and which Cameron's office has never fully denied, the Foreign Secretary told Khan that issuing warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant would be like dropping a hydrogen bomb. Think about that language. Not a legal argument. Not a diplomatic objection. A threat of catastrophic consequences.
Cameron reportedly drew comparisons between Russia's prosecution for war crimes in Ukraine and the potential prosecution of Israeli leaders, arguing that Israel was defending itself from the attacks of October 7. This is a fundamentally political argument being used to interfere with a supposedly independent judicial process. The ICC is designed to apply international humanitarian law without regard to political justifications.
But here's where it gets even more disturbing. According to the allegations, Cameron stated that the UK would defund the court and withdraw from the Rome Statute if warrants were issued. This isn't diplomatic pressure. This is explicit blackmail, threatening to destroy an international institution unless it delivers the political outcome Britain demands.
Cameron allegedly warned Khan to take a step back and consider things. Consider what, exactly? Consider that international law doesn't apply when powerful nations and their allies are accused. Consider that justice is contingent on geopolitical alignment. Consider that his career and the institution he leads could be destroyed if he proceeds.
The UK government's response has been telling. Cameron's office characterized the call as robust but claimed he merely pointed out Conservative Party positions rather than making threats. This is classic doublespeak. You don't call someone alone, use language about hydrogen bombs and institutional destruction, and then claim you were just sharing information.
Karim Khan himself later confirmed, in formal statements, that a senior British official had threatened to withdraw UK funding during this period. He didn't name Cameron initially, likely to avoid further political retaliation, but the FOI confirmation now establishes the connection definitively.
International law experts have stated that this conduct may violate the Rome Statute, the founding treaty of the ICC, and could constitute obstruction of justice. Article 70 of the Rome Statute specifically criminalizes c. abruptly influencing a witness, obstructing or interfering with the attendance or testimony of a witness. Threatening a prosecutor to influence their charging decisions would clearly fall within this prohibition.
Let's be clear about what the ICC was investigating. By April 2024, Israel's military operations in Gaza had killed over 34,000 Palestinians, the majority civilians, according to Gaza health authorities. Entire neighborhoods had been reduced to rubble. Humanitarian organizations documented widespread destruction of civilian infrastructure, including hospitals, schools, and refugee camps. Starvation was being used as a weapon of war, with aid blocked from reaching desperate populations.
These are precisely the circumstances where international humanitarian law is supposed to provide protection. The Geneva Conventions, the Rome Statute, the entire architecture of international criminal law was built on the principle that civilians must be protected during armed conflict, and that those who systematically violate these protections must face accountability.
But when that accountability mechanism turned its attention to a close ally of Western powers, suddenly the rules didn't apply. David Cameron, representing one of the permanent members of the UN Security Council, allegedly attempted to intimidate the ICC prosecutor into dropping the investigation.
This isn't the first time powerful nations have interfered with the ICC. The United States, which never ratified the Rome Statute, passed the American Service Members Protection Act in 2002, which authorizes military force to free any American or Allied personnel held by the court. It's literally nicknamed the Hague Invasion Act.
The U.S. has also sanctioned ICC officials, including Karim Khan's predecessor Fatou Bensouda, when the court investigated American war crimes in Afghanistan. The message is unmistakable: international law applies to our enemies, but not to us or our allies.
But the UK is different. Britain is a state party to the Rome Statute. It helped establish the ICC and has consistently supported prosecutions of war crimes in other contexts. Cameron himself, as Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary, championed ICC investigations into atrocities in Syria, Sudan, and Ukraine. The hypocrisy is staggering.
What we're witnessing is the selective application of international law based purely on geopolitical interests. When Russia invades Ukraine, ICC arrest warrants for Putin and Russian officials are praised. When Israel conducts operations that international law experts across the political spectrum say violate humanitarian law, suddenly the court is overstepping.
And this selectivity doesn't just undermine the ICC. It destroys the very concept of a rules-based international order. If law only applies to the weak and never constrains the powerful, then it's not law at all. It's just power dressed up in legal language.
The implications extend far beyond this specific case. Every future ICC investigation will now operate under the shadow of this precedent. Prosecutors will know that if they target individuals protected by powerful states, they risk institutional destruction. Witnesses and victims will know that justice is conditional. Defendants who lack powerful sponsors will know the system is rigged.
And autocratic regimes around the world are taking notes. Why should they cooperate with international human rights mechanisms when Western democracies openly sabotage these same institutions when it suits their interests? China points to this hypocrisy when deflecting criticism of Uyghur persecution. Russia cites it when dismissing war crimes allegations. The entire normative framework of international law is corroded.
Let's talk about who benefits from this interference. Obviously, Netanyahu and Gallant avoid potential arrest and prosecution. The Israeli government maintains its freedom of action in Gaza without legal constraint. But the benefits extend further.
Arms manufacturers in the UK and US continue supplying weapons to Israel without the complications that ICC proceedings might create. Defense contractors like BAE Systems, Lockheed Martin, and Raytheon have multi-billion-dollar stakes in these relationships. Legal accountability for how those weapons are used threatens those profit streams.
Political leaders in the UK and US avoid difficult questions about their complicity in potential war crimes through arms transfers and diplomatic support. If ICC prosecutions moved forward, British and American officials could potentially face legal jeopardy for aiding and abetting crimes under international law.
And more broadly, powerful states preserve their ability to operate above international law. The same governments that wage wars, support coups, sell weapons to dictatorships, and maintain global military presences don't want meaningful legal constraints on their actions.
Who loses? The Palestinian victims who have no recourse to justice. The broader principle of civilian protection in armed conflict. The credibility of every international institution designed to constrain violence and protect human rights.
Future victims of atrocities everywhere lose, because the message is clear: if your perpetrators have powerful friends, you will never see justice.
Now let's step back and look at the pattern connecting these stories. On the surface, carbon taxation policy in Hong Kong and ICC interference by the UK seem unrelated. But they reveal the same fundamental dynamic.
In both cases, we see institutions and policy mechanisms designed to serve the public good, climate protection in one case, international justice in the other, being systematically undermined when they threaten powerful interests.
In Hong Kong, carbon taxation would impose costs on the corporations and wealthy individuals who dominate the territory's political economy. So despite overwhelming scientific consensus that carbon pricing is essential for climate action, the policy is rejected to maintain competitiveness, which is code for maintaining elite wealth accumulation.
In the UK, ICC prosecution of Israeli leaders would create diplomatic complications for British foreign policy and defense relationships. So despite Britain's treaty obligations and stated commitment to international law, political interference attempts to derail the investigation.
The pattern is, when accountability mechanisms threaten the powerful, those mechanisms are broken. Not through honest debate about their merits, but through cynical manipulation cloaked in technocratic language.
Paul Chan doesn't say we're protecting corporate profits at the expense of climate action. He says Hong Kong is maintaining its core competitiveness and pursuing collaboration with the private sector. David Cameron doesn't say we're sabotaging international justice to protect an ally. His office says he pointed out Conservative Party positions.
This is how power operates in the 21st century. Not through crude oppression, though that still exists, but through the sophisticated corruption of institutions that might constrain it. Regulatory capture. Diplomatic pressure. Market discipline. The defunding and delegitimization of public goods.
And it's working. Climate action is delayed another decade while emissions rise. War crimes continue with impunity. Inequality deepens. Democratic accountability erodes. All while officials make speeches about sustainability and rules-based order.
The question is, what can we do about it? Because recognizing the pattern isn't enough. These structures won't reform themselves.
On climate, the answer is building political movements powerful enough to overcome corporate resistance. Carbon taxation isn't technically difficult, dozens of jurisdictions have implemented it successfully. It's politically difficult because fossil fuel interests and adjacent industries have captured policy-making processes.
That means organizing workers, communities, and constituencies that have more to gain from climate action than from preserving the current system. Building coalitions that can challenge corporate power directly through elections, regulations, and if necessary, direct action.
On international justice, it means supporting institutions like the ICC while also recognizing their limitations. The court can only be as strong as member states allow it to be. When powerful states undermine it, civil society has to create consequences.
That could mean prosecuting officials like David Cameron under domestic laws against obstruction of justice. It could mean parliamentary inquiries in the UK that expose the full extent of interference. It could mean popular movements demanding that governments either commit to international law consistently or honestly admit they don't believe in it.
More fundamentally, it means rejecting the false choice between cynical realism and naive idealism. Yes, power matters in international relations. Yes, economic interests shape policy. But that doesn't mean we have to accept a world where might makes right and institutions exist only to legitimize the powerful.
Alternative systems are possible. We know this because they've existed. The period after World War II saw the creation of international institutions with real authority. The civil rights movement showed that entrenched power can be challenged. The success of climate movements in closing coal plants and blocking pipelines proves that corporate interests aren't invincible.
But those victories required organizing, sacrifice, and confrontation. They didn't come from working within systems designed to prevent change. They came from building power outside those systems and forcing transformation.
As we wrap up tonight, remember that these stories, carbon tax policy and ICC interference, aren't isolated. They're connected by the fundamental logic of a global order that prioritizes profit and power over people and planet.
The climate crisis accelerates while governments refuse to constrain polluters. War crimes continue while leaders sabotage accountability mechanisms. This isn't failure. It's the system working as designed to protect those who benefit from it.
Our job, as journalists and as citizens, is to expose that system. To name it clearly. To connect the dots that the powerful would prefer remain hidden. And to support those fighting to build something better.
Stay informed. Stay critical. And don't let anyone tell you that this is just how things have to be.
I'm Alex Truth.
And I'm Maya Clarity.
Thanks for watching Truth Report.
Until next time, keep seeking truth and demanding accountability.